Welcome to Check This Out, podcast for kids.
And their grown-ups, where we explore interesting people, places, ponderings, and past moments from history that shape the world around us. My name is Amy Contreras.
And I'm Cece.
Today's episode is another mini episode. In this quick episode, you're going to get to learn all about President James Monroe.
I remember him.
James Monroe was the 5th president of the United States. Can you tell me who our first 4 presidents were?
George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson.
You're doing great. And James Madison was the 4th president. So James Monroe came after all those guys.
I'm excited to learn more.
Me too. I think James Monroe's a little underrated. He served as the 5th president of the United States from 1817 to 1825. But first, let's talk a little bit about his life before the presidency. He was born on April 28, 1758 in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He was the son of a wealthy planter and was educated at the College of William and Mary. His parents died when he was in his teens, and he received a generous inheritance.
Check this out.
Much like the Virginia-born presidents before him, such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, James Monroe was an enslaver. James Monroe owned between 75 to 250 enslaved people during his life.
How sad.
James Monroe began his public service in the Continental Army during the American Revolution against the British.
Check this out.
James Monroe is one of only 3 United States presidents who fought in the Revolutionary War. George Washington, James Monroe, and Andrew Jackson all served in the Continental Army.
He sounds really brave.
He sure was. He fought in several important battles during the Revolutionary War, including the Battle of Trenton, Monmouth, Brandywine, and Germantown. During the Battle of Trenton, he was badly injured. The good news is he recovered, and his role shifted to more political through the end of the war.
Here's a fun fact.
James Monroe actually crossed the Delaware River with George Washington for the attack on the British that would eventually become known as the Battle of Trenton.
I learned something new today.
After the Revolutionary War, Monroe studied law with Thomas Jefferson as his advisor, and he began a career in politics.
That is cool.
James Monroe eventually was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates and served as a delegate to the Continental Congress.
I want to check out more about that.
Monroe was the U.S. Minister to France, where he played a role in negotiating the Louisiana Purchase in 1803.
I remember hearing about that.
He served as the governor of Virginia twice. He served as the Secretary of State under 4th President James Madison. He also served as the Secretary of War under President James Madison. And he was a practicing lawyer.
Wow!
I know. Oh, and I did forget to mention, he married his wife Elizabeth in 1786, and they had 3 children, but one died as a baby. Now that we know all about his time leading up to the presidency, let's get into his time as president. James Monroe was elected the 5th president in 1816, and he served 2 terms. His time as president is looked back on as both calm and prosperous for the United States.
What does that mean?
Prosperous is a fancy word for successful or filled with wealth.
That makes a lot of sense.
James Monroe's presidency is sometimes referred to as the era of good feelings because it was a period of political unity and calmer foreign affairs after the War of 1812.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, Cece, good memory. We talked about the War of 1812 in the episode on James Madison. While James Monroe's time as president was mostly calm, there were still a few big moments to highlight.
Like what, Mama?
He had some big issues to deal with when it came to the states, slavery, and indigenous people. For example, while he was president, the First Seminole War took place in 1817. And that was because runaway blacks were escaping to Seminole Indian Territory in Florida. Monroe authorized the United States acquisition of the Floridas from Spain in 1819. The Missouri Compromise happened in 1820, which created a law to balance slavery in the United States. Missouri was admitted to the U.S. as a slave state, and Maine was admitted as a free state. This law helped balance the power between slave and free states in the United States.
I want to check out more about that.
You should. 2 years into his presidency, Monroe faced an economic crisis known as the Panic of 1819. And in 1823, the Monroe Doctrine was shared while he was speaking to Congress, which made a lasting impact on the foreign policy of the United States.
Tell me everything!
One of his most important legacies is the Monroe Doctrine. It warned European countries like Britain, France, and Spain against trying to colonize or interfere in the Americas. This doctrine didn't allow European colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. President Monroe worked closely with his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, on it. Basically, the doctrine made sure that only the United States could occupy the land that is now the United States, and that if European countries tried, the U.S. would take it as an act of aggression or war.
My mind is blown.
So even though it was the era of good feelings, James Monroe was still busy as president. He and his wife both loved France and all things French. They redecorated the White House after it had been damaged in the War of 1812. The Monroes spent lots of money on fancy French furniture, silverware, and various objects imported from France. Monroe left the presidency in 1825, but he had accrued large debts through travel and ignoring his personal affairs while he was president. After he retired, he went back to Congress and asked for funds to reimburse himself. Twice! He was given 2 payments of $30,000 from Congress.
Whoa, no way.
While James Monroe is sometimes overlooked as a president when compared to the first 4, his contributions in establishing American policy and national identity have had a lasting impact. The Monroe Doctrine still influences foreign policy in the U.S. He passed away on the 4th of July in 1831. We'd love to tell you more about 5th President James Monroe, but we promised you an episode that was short and sweet. So we hope you learned something new about our 5th President, James Monroe. And with that,
thanks for listening.
Our sources for this week are Encyclopedia Britannica, the Smithsonian, and the UVA Miller Center.
See you next episode.